You don't need to be an academic to be a historian. You don't need to have a degree, you don't need to go to university, but what you do need to know is a certain level of skill sets, particularly when it comes to research and the dissemination of research. I say this as a modern history major. If you haven't noticed, my modern history degree is skewed towards nautical things and Soviet things. The skills that I've picked up in this degree, with studying modern history, can be extended to other periods as well. The simple fact is, anybody can be a historian, but crucially, what separates the amateur and the respected historian is how they read, research, and share information. In that sense, us snooty academics do have an advantage due to our studies. Historical studies at a university level isn't so much about X did Y on said date. It's more showing the fact that you have the ability to research complex historical events and contextualizing them with other sources from the period and after the period to form the narrative and to understand what actually happened. With that said, I want to teach you about how to understand one of the more daunting kinds of sources, a primary visual source. Now, before we get into it, a lot of you will know the difference already, but just as a refresher, a primary source is a source from the event or the time period in question by somebody involved in said event. So for example, Winston Churchill's speech, the "We Will Never Surrender" speech, that's a primary source. A secondary source is written after the event, and that can crucially, and this is where people get mixed up, it can be written by the person who was alive at the time, but if it's written after the event, looking back at it, it's a secondary source. So Churchill's memoirs on the Second World War written in the 50s, that's a secondary source. My video on Long Tan, secondary source. Makes sense, right? Easy enough. Now, this here is what we will be examining throughout this video, and I will teach you some skills here. I have chosen propaganda for this exercise because nothing on propaganda is by accident. Every design detail, no matter how minute, is there because it is important and it adds to the story that the propaganda is going to be telling you. The caption on this bit of propaganda, it is in French, and it tells the story of Agricole Viala. Now, he is aged 15, but different bits of propaganda will say that he's 11 or 12. We'll get into that, it's important. But I'll read essentially why he is famous and what the reasoning for it is. So this is a primary written source that I'm using here. So the French version of events reads, "In vain they tried to hold him back. He braved the danger, and no one could stop him from carrying out his audacious plan. He seized a sapper's hatchet, he shot at the enemy several times with his musket. Then, despite the musket balls whistling around him, he reached the riverbank, and seizing his hatchet, struck the rope with vigour. Luck seemed to be with him at first. He nearly completed his perilous task without being hit. When at that moment a musket ball pierced his breast, he still managed to get up, but he fell again with great force, crying out in his provincial dialect, 'Man passe manquois, aquo es égal, mort per la libertat.' They haven't missed me, all is equal, I die for liberty." Then he expired after the sublime farewell without complaint or regret. Shortly thereafter, when his mother was told of what happened, his mother allegedly said, "Yes, he died for the fatherland." So the story is that a royalist army was attacking the French revolutionaries. The revolutionaries retreated across a pontoon bridge. A pontoon bridge, by the way, is at this time is essentially just a series of floating boats with a roof over it, so people to walk over, held together by ropes. It's a temporary river crossing. And this little hero ran up to the bridge, smacked it away with an axe, got shot in the process, and as he died, he cried that he died for liberty. It's obviously a propagandized account. It's very in-your-face propaganda, and not all propaganda will be this in your face. But it's really, really good for what we're about to do. This little bit of propaganda here. This is a great lesson. Now, this is a poster. It would be on a town hall or disseminated as a small flyer, but this is essentially a poster. And this is a great example of how national identity is used in propaganda and how national symbols are portrayed in propaganda. Now look at this image. I'm going to give you a few seconds to pause the video. Now write a comment for me in a couple words about what you see and what jumps out at you. I will reply to them and we can go over some things. Also, we can chat in Discord if you want about this as well. You can join the Discord. Pause it for a second. Write what you see. Write what jumps out at you. Write what you think is important about the visual aspects of this source. And we'll see if you picked up some of the things I did. easy things first. The account I read you is essentially what's written underneath this, like I said, but it is also based on other accounts of the incidents from what would be considered primary sources. The text is important, but we will get to that later on. The most important bit of the text is essentially that "I die for liberty" line, but we'll get into that. We just want to look at the visuals. Now, the first thing I want to bring your attention to is the colour. Now, look at that jacket. It's blue, specifically a darker blue. His undershirt is white, and his cuffs, they are red. Remind you of anything in particular? Exactly. Now, the colours are vital here, and they also are reflected in his pale skin, contrasting with the feathers and the cockade in his hat. What is particularly interesting is the fact that he's portrayed as wearing a uniform, something that was rather unlikely in the early revolution. Well, at least a uniform of this quality, at least. He would not be this clean, and it is a very heroic pose. The colour complexion here is vital, and these colours have become synonymous with France and French revolutionary ideals. There is a reason why so many countries adopted similar revolutionary people's colours. Italy here is a great example. The idea is exactly the same. They adopt very similar colours, just opt out the blue for the green. And it has become a part of national identity. And this is before the French Republic is claimed, so you can sort of see the building blocks of a national identity. Someone who is willing to die for liberty being shown that he is proudly wearing the revolutionary colours. These are all things that you can gather from this source. Now we have the French national colours. Well, the revolutionary French colours. Ignore the royalists. But what else? There's something really big I'm hoping somebody catches on in their comment, because it is crucial to understanding the depiction. Give you a few more seconds. You can pause the video again, make the comment. I want your attention to draw to his face. Viala is shown in an angelic sort of pose, and his face looks angelic, not too dissimilar to the depiction of saints and Jesus Christ in his facial expressions. This is a huge factor in revolutionary France. Remember what I said, when we look at primary sources, we need to contextualize them with other sources of the period. What do we know about France during this time period in the late 1700s? We know that it is a Catholic nation. Avignon, for example, which is not far from where this occurred, was part of the Papal States. It was a territory of the papacy. Having this depiction of this young boy who's heroic, he's fighting for liberty, he's dying for liberty, and he's depicted as a small fallen angel, you start to see how this would resonate with essentially a Catholic state. Think about this further. Where would you see this? Day to day, where would you see this? And that's a really important point. Now, not everyone in France is literate, and a really important point to note at this point, again, contextualizing this source. Remember how I said provincial dialect? What I said before wasn't in French, it was a southern, what would be considered a southern French or Occitanian dialect. The answer as to where you would see this is you would see it on public notice boards, you would see it being handed out in the streets, but crucially, you would see it on churches and church doors. You would see it given out around churches. Because what does everyone do when they're Catholics? Well, every Sunday they go to Mass. It's a common thing that you do as a Catholic. You portray this kind of angelic complexion, this kind of angelic feature, and you do it at a church. It's really, really important. So you start to see how these different elements to this propaganda is coming together. Now, there's one other crucial bit here. I mentioned that he was 15, but is often portrayed as 11 or 12. Notice how he looks a little young, a little too young to be 15. That can be considered in many ways, particularly to a prideful nation such as the French, and that's not an insult to the French, they are very prideful. It can be considered an insult, particularly to people who are older. Now, this young boy, he died for liberty, he died for you, for your rights as a citizen, and you as an adult don't have the guts to fight? Do you see what I mean? There's a sort of guilt there, and the propaganda brings out a sort of guilt. I want to compare it to a bit of Australian propaganda from the First World War. This famous one of "Cooey, why won't you come?" to Gallipoli. It's a sense of guilt. I'm doing this for you. Why can't you do it with me? What's your problem? Man up. That kind of thing, if that makes sense. But do you see what I mean? There is always meaning behind every little bit of detail on a bit of propaganda. And a primary source such as this is vital. It's not just a quick picture go, oh yeah, okay, that's cool. it's really important that you contextualize it and you look at it. There is a lot to look at and unpack here, but so let's look at the text for a little bit. Specifically that line, "I die for liberty." Now that's a battle cry and a half if I've ever seen one. Further to that, I draw your eyes to the start of the text with "La Marseillaise." It's in the provincial dialect again. That is the French national anthem, La Marseillaise in today's terms. It is a song based on rebels from this region. And as I've said before, it is a march. So imagine this, you're in a public place, in a market, revolutionaries start singing this slogan. In the background, you can hear, and I'll translate what the French national anthem is, you can hear, "Aux armes, citoyens, formez your bataillons." So, to arms, citizens, form your battalions. And you're reading the slogan while that song is going on, and you can hear, and you're reading, "I die for liberty," as the chorus picks up and goes, "To arms, citizens, prepare your battalions." You start to see how the propaganda, the music, the visuals, the time period, it all contextualizes to give you an ideal and to give you that idea into that mindset. A really important part of history and understanding history is to get your modern mindset, put it in a box, throw the box into the sea, and try and place yourself in the mindset, and what you are thinking and what people were thinking at the time is going to be completely different. I see this as the use of a child soldier, and it's completely heartbreaking that a child had to die in this way. But that's not what the French saw. That's not what the people saw. And there is another channel out there, the Eternal Medievalist. He's explained before, I don't think he's done it in a video yet, but I know he's working on it, that we in the modern sense do not understand piety. In our understanding of the word piety and our understanding of religion is so skewed compared to how people in the medieval period, but also in this period, understand religion. It's very different. So you have to really compartmentalize your modern thoughts when you look at a source like this. You have to put it in a box, like I said, throw it away, and think. What would the French be thinking? If I was a pious Catholic Frenchman and I saw this, what would it make me feel like? What would the music make me feel like, given the situation? Now, anyone else see anything else that stands out? I'll give you one last thing. The cockade on his hat. It is a crucial symbol of the revolution, and was an identifier used by people to show that they believed in and supported the revolution. Now, Viala is proudly sporting it on his hat with those feathers. Coupled together, this shows the more symbology of nation and the building of a French revolutionary identity as citizens, not subjects. It is the citizens' colours, the citizens' symbols. One thing about the French Revolution is it sort of births the idea of the citizen. Not to say that countries didn't exist beforehand, but prior to the French Revolution, people tended to see themselves as subjects. The event in itself, it brings to light the idea of you are a citizen of a larger group, a nation of people, a nation state. And it brings this sort of realization and this thought somewhat violently across Europe, of course, which is why you see so many post-Napoleonic republics popping up based on the ideals of revolution and using symbology such as this. In fact, the monarchies that survive the revolutionary years, the most famous of which being the British Empire and the British monarchy, and whose monarchy has endured to the modern day, use this kind of symbology as well, and you really see the shift from subject to citizen. Now, what does this have to do with Viala? Well, his story, we don't know how much about it is real at all, but what we do know is that the symbology he is wearing here and depicted as wearing, and he himself, are symbols of nation state, and they are symbols used to support the idea of revolution and to urge on the people to show the same kind of vigor to fight and be willing to die as Agricole Viala did. It's to inspire that in everyone, that I die for liberty. It's to bring that out in people at the time. The colours he is wearing, the feathers, the depiction of his face, it's a uniform. The whole thing is a uniform. In a modern sense, and again, we can't really use a modern understanding of this as well. You can sort of use it with the uniform and the feeling of a citizen. The United States military is a really good example here, and you can equate it. But for someone in the Commonwealth nations, like if you see, as an Australian, you see a slouch hat, you see an Australian Army soldier, the uniform means something. It is uniquely Australian. This is uniquely French. Go to a rugby game and you see someone dressed in black with a silver fern. That's a Kiwi. You know it's a Kiwi. It's pride and symbology of nation. And what this whole source is symbology of the revolution and the French nation. This is just one source. I've written a very large essay on this exact source before. And no, you don't need to go this in depth in explaining every single source. Sometimes an egg is just an egg. But these visual ones, and propaganda in particular, as I said, everything is intentional when it comes to propaganda. I purposely missed a few things here, quite a few actually. And I'd like to know if a few of you can point them out. There are two major ones that I'm thinking of, but there's a couple more. If you can point them out in the comments, please do. Think on it, examine, look, contextualize with other sources from the period. It will make you a better historian. It will make you a smarter historian, and it will teach you how you can back your arguments up with fact. I may put a community post up about this as well, but I had this idea of a series called A Propaganda, where we literally look at propaganda from different parts of history and go over what the chosen symbols mean and what the motive and intent is behind it. I thought it could be fun considering you guys can submit propaganda on the Discord, for example, and I can look at it. As always, like, comment, subscribe, join the Discord. I know this video won't be as popular, but I would like to hopefully, and I don't want to sound snooty, I want people to understand how to examine a source correctly. Because you can't just link a Wikipedia article and say you've won an argument. That's not how it works. You've got to be able to examine the source, argue why it's important, how it's important, but most importantly of all of this, you need to understand it yourself.